Anyway, the two quick stories, and actually with that we'll be done. One involved the story of a French and U.S. Pentecostal leader within my denomination, the Assemblies of God. And as they met, and by the way, French Pentecostals um, typically wear, the women typically wear a covering over their head as part of their own traditional distinctive, and but they have no reticence or hesitation whatsoever to drink a glass of wine. After all, they're French. But the U.S. Pentecostal leader and his wife were spending the week with this French Pentecostal leader and his wife, and finally at the end of the week, the U.S. Pentecostal leader finally said to the French Pentecostal leader, he said, I've been meaning to say this all week long, but I've really been um, deeply deeply bothered by the fact that you have a glass of wine every night with your dinner. And the French Pentecostal leader responded and said, and I've been meaning to talk to you because I'm deeply offended that your wife doesn't wear a covering over her head during prayer in our church. And anyway, so as the two leaders sat there and thought a minute, kind of two different light bulbs went on in their heads as they realized that yes, we all have our own traditions and distinctives, but in reality, I think Christians began to unite in a common shared experience that united them together, even if some of their minor disagreements in their from their own traditions and their own beliefs still weren't important enough to separate them. One other example I'll give from my own personal life occurred at my church when I was a campus pastor at the University of Oregon. And while I served here, I was in this church, and it was kind of a blue collar church, I would say, fairly conservative in a conservative town. While the city of Eugene, Oregon, where University of Oregon resides, tends to be a little bit more progressive and liberal, very progressive. Uh, the neighboring city, Springfield, is much more blue collar and conservative. And I attended an Assembly of God church there, and I remember one day, my when I was having meetings on campus, God kind of surprised me, and all in one meeting, virtually almost every person I'm about to mention came to this one meeting. There was a group of international students that walked in. I was very excited, and that they had come that night. And after them walked in, almost one by one, a a a Wiccan warlock, a Buddhist monk, a neo-Nazi skinhead, and an albino transvestite. And and I was, God kind of surprised me that night. I didn't know what was going to happen next, and as the neo-Nazi skinhead came up to me in the middle of my next point in my sermon and said he had a knife on him, and he told me he was going to kill the albino transvestite. Well, certainly I began to pray much harder. I didn't know what was going to happen, but at the end of that meeting, virtually everyone in that room, except for unfortunately the Wiccan warlock, except for him, everyone else in that room received Christ. God really surprised me that day. Showed me that no one is too distant from God. And but the next week, interestingly enough, we were going to my very conservative church, and who came with me that day? The neo-Nazi skinhead and the albino transvestite. And I was kind of curious what the reaction of my church would be, because the transvestite was still wearing a dress, still dressed up in makeup. But the first thing people noticed when we walked in was, of course, that he was albino. But secondarily, people slowly started noticing that there was something else different about him. And I remember at the very end of the service, it was really one of the proudest moments of the church I was attending at the time. I remember three great big men in the room made a beeline for my friend Michael, the transvestite. I thought they were going to kick him out of the church, but one by one, they were all big as lumberjacks. One of them was a lumberjack, and and one by one, they looked at Michael, they grabbed him and hugged him, and said how grateful they were here, how grateful they were and thankful they were to have Michael be there with them that day. And that really changed Michael and brought a turning point in his life. And as we think about the challenges we face in our world today and the message that we present to our hurting and broken world, no one is beyond the grasp of God's Holy Spirit or beyond His grace. Thank you. I look forward to talking to you a little bit more about the neo-charismatic or third wave movement and what else God might be doing in the world today in our next session.